fortified bunkers. The North Korean defenders waited until the artillery and air support given to the 2nd Division assault forces was lifted and then returned to their firing positions. As the 23rd Regiment soldiers climbed the last few yards towards the crest, the North Koreans opened up with their automatic weapons, rifles, and grenades. Also, since they controlled the valley to the west, which has shallower and easier access routes to the ridge, the KPA is not having any problem supplying their troops on the ridge. In fact, today, the fresh 13th Regiment replaces 1st Regiment in their lines without issue. It is the 1st Marine Division attacking north of the Punch Bowl, aiming to take Hill 749. And on the 13th and 14th, slowly eliminates concealed enemy bunkers there and secures Hill 751. However, at midnight last night, the 2 battalions making those attacks, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions from the 1st Marines, come under serious attack, and especially the 2nd takes many casualties in a bloody fight. They survived those attacks, though, and by sundown today, Hill 749 is also in the Marines' possession. Those Marines are attached to U.S. 10th Corps, and also today, Van Fleet goes to both 2nd Division and 10th Corps headquarters and gives orders to firm up the lines by the 20th and plan no offensives after that date, though not because peace has suddenly broken out. So I said at the start that last week was the San Francisco Conference for the Western World War II allies and company to finally sign a peace treaty with Japan. I talked a bunch about it, the nations for and against the treaty, and the terms, which included allowing Japan to rearm, lifting restrictions on Japanese industry, and allowing the American military to continue to operate there post-occupation. The reason offered for rearming Japan was to lessen the military burden on the United States. Likewise, the reason for lifting restrictions on her industries and absolving her from reparations was to lessen the economic burden on the United States. The price for Japan was the acceptance of a collateral agreement giving bases in Japan to the American military. So long as the Korean War went on, and China was involved in it, the United States could always argue that a real peace conference among the interested powers was impossible. So long as the Korean War went on, the American military could always insist that they had to have bases in Japan to carry on the war and to protect Japan itself from invasion. Stone goes on, and it's pretty interesting, and it's pretty cynical when you think about it. The United States could not afford to have a ceasefire before the San Francisco Conference. The Korean War made Japan a prisoner of American policy. Peace in Korea threatened to loosen the bonds. I don't really know if it's quite so extreme, but here's a timeline of smaller events, right? August 13th, the Soviets decide they will attend the conference. August 17th, the Wall Street Journal reports that the U.S. State Department thinks the Soviets want to sabotage the conference, likely in part by demanding that communist China take part in the conference. A ceasefire before it begins would make the Chinese look a lot more sympathetic. The U.S. reaction to this is to demand more in the Keesong talks than the communist side would concede, which would mean that unless they completely caved in, there would be no ceasefire reached until after the conference. Okay, that's what the Wall Street Journal wrote. But we've seen that it's a lot more nuanced overall, and there are an awful lot of people high up in the UN or US side who do want a ceasefire now. Still, that same day, Peking Radio broadcast that Communist Chief Delegate Nam Il was willing to compromise on the 38th parallel issue, which might not have been a total cave-in exactly, but it's something. The talks were broken off on the 23rd by the communist side, as we saw. And then on the 26th, the New York Times wrote this. One thing seems clear. The time lost on the neutral zone fracas makes it unlikely that there can be a truce agreement by September 4th when the San Francisco Conference begins. Many United States officials had believed the Russians wanted a truce concluded before the conference. The Russians, the theory runs, want to use the armistice to document their claim to peacemaker and win allies in their fight against a treaty from among those Asian nations who are already opposed to some of its provisions. Stone puts all of this together and says that only this war made that treaty possible. I don't think it's as cut and dried as all that. Well, history does not happen in a vacuum. So the war and the conference, of course, are interconnected. But we saw very specific North Korean and Chinese machinations in and around Kaesong that do indicate anything other than a willingness to quickly conclude a peace deal. Then again, this is the Soviet Stone is talking about. I just thought it was interesting how it all connects, at least to the more cynical mindset. UN Commander Matt Ridgway never really liked Kaesong as the site chosen for the talks, being in enemy-held territory. And last week, he wrote a strongly worded missive to Washington, letting them know just that. He deeply regretted UN concessions because he believed they signal weakness. Of the UN concessions, the one he regretted the most was the agreement to meet at Kaesong. He made up his mind that should the communists indicate a willingness to resume the talks, the UN team absolutely would not return to Kaesong. A new, truly neutral site, policed by both sides, would have to be found. The Joint Chiefs sympathize with Ridgway, but they're not sold on categorically refusing Kaesong. They don't want him to release anything that could be construed as an ultimatum. Well, this week on the 11th, after not hearing anything from the communists about resuming the talks, Ridgway asked the chiefs if he can capture Kaesong militarily. He'll give the enemy 24 hours notice of the proposed operation and also impose no conditions that could be construed in any way as ending the talks. But a monkey wrench is thrown into these plans. See, the communists suddenly claim that early on the 10th, planes from the Far Eastern Air Force have attacked the Kaesong neutral zone. This they have claimed earlier, if you'll remember. But this time, it is most certainly true. A plane from the 3rd Bomber Wing goes off course and strafes Kaesong. Nobody is hurt, but Ridgway feels it necessary to apologize for the violation. Because of that, the Joint Chiefs think it might be a bad time for him to actually launch an operation to take Kaesong. Approval is denied. In fact, they cable Ridgway that taking Kaesong after the apology would be used by commies to support their charges that the admitted violation was intentional and give color to past charges of UN violations in Kaesong area and of intentions to break off negotiations. And there I will end this week of the war. A week of still more bloody action in the field that does not lead to success for the attackers in one fight, but does to a degree in another. Ridgway fuming because of circumstance and a cynical view of the relationship between the Korean War and the San Francisco Conference. The treaty produced has yet to be ratified, of course, so it might never go into effect. But the US has likely secured its interests in Japan for the foreseeable future. And the Americans who go to Japan then go to Korea for the war for the foreseeable future. And those men will go into battle to fight the North Koreans or Chinese to take hills and ridges that don't even have names for the foreseeable future. And thousands of those men on both sides will die. Who knows how long the fight over numbered hills and nameless ridges will continue. But I shall be here to cover it however long it is, and it is thanks to the Time Ghost Army that I can do that. The Army is our foundation. You too can join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com and be part of all of this. And Thomas Key is the Army Member of the Week for Korea. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time. They did what? They reinforced them by helicopters? Like how? Uh-huh. Wow. All those men straight to the front lines by helicopters, huh? Yeah, I never heard of that before. Okay. September 23rd, 1951. There is a bloody fight in progress for yet another of the seemingly interminable nameless ridges of Central Korea. Did I say nameless? Well, this one at least gets a name on the UN side. They call it Heartbreak Ridge. I'm Indy Nidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, an accidental UN aerial attack against the Keesong neutral zone prompted UN Commander Matt Ridgway to issue an apology and abandon his plan for taking Keesong militarily. And both US 2nd Division and the 1st Marine Division began new offensives not all that far away from each other. That ridge that 2nd Division is attacking and that battle have been given a name by the Western journalists: Heartbreak Ridge. For the US 2nd Division, the outlook was rather grim. The narrow Piari Valley, southwest of Heartbreak, was jammed with vehicles and exposed to enemy artillery and mortar fire. Korean civilian porters frequently abandoned their loads along the trails and bolted for cover when the enemy got too close. To keep the frontline units supplied with food, water, ammunition, and equipment, and to evacuate the casualties, often required that American infantrymen double as carriers and litter bearers. The rugged terrain and the close enemy surveillance of the approaches to Heartbreak Ridge made their jobs very hazardous and time-consuming, for it could take up to 10 hours to bring down a litter case from the forward positions held by the 23rd Regiment. On the 19th, 9th Infantry Commander John Lynch suggests that since the enemy's resistance is so concentrated, they should broaden the attack. He wants acting 2nd Division Commander Tom DeShazo to let him send his 1st Battalion across the Mundung Ni Valley to take Hills 867 and 1024, which are like 5 and 6 kilometers southwest of Hill 894, the southernmost crest of Heartbreak Ridge. This might lead the North Koreans to think that they're trying to surround the ridge from the west, and maybe they divert a bunch of their firepower to block such a challenge. DeShazo, though, nixes this since 10th Corps Commander Clovis Byers has ordered that Hill 931, the central and tallest crest of the ridge, be given top priority. On the 20th, Robert Young, the new permanent 2nd Division commander, arrives on the scene to take over from DeShazo. And he likes Lynch's plans for taking the two hills. He tells Lynch to attack Hill 867 today and then take Hill 1024 once that falls. In the interim, 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet tells Byers he wants 10th Corps' western flank brought into phase with 9th Corps to its left. So on the 22nd, Byers orders ROK, South Korean, 7th Division to take Hill 1142, which lies like 2 kilometers northwest of Hill 1024. Maybe those two attacks together would divert the North Koreans and lessen their resistance on Heartbreak Ridge itself. Maybe. Attacks the 21st and 22nd on the ridge by the 23rd Infantry have little in the way of success. Elements of 1st Battalion do actually manage to reach the top of Hill 931, but only briefly. A blistering counterattack by the North Korean 3rd Regiment from 12th Division literally decimates 1st Battalion, and they have to pull off the hill. We will see next week how the diversionary attacks go. This battle is as bloody as the battle for Bloody Ridge a couple of weeks ago was. The 23rd Regiment, whose show this battle was, left its blood along every step of the way up the ridge. Again, the fighting was close in, brutal, dangerous, while mortars and artillery punished each side without respite. Again and again, American companies of the 23rd fought their painful way up the slopes, blasting bunkers, killing enemy in their trenches, and again, reaching the crests exhausted and low on ammunition, they were knocked off by a howling charge of fresh North Koreans. Companies are whittled down to just 30 or 40 men, then replenished by inexperienced newcomers awaiting deployment in Japan. The UN forces are killing enemy soldiers at a pace of something like 9-1, but for the guys dying to do it, it's not a whole lot of satisfaction. Fehrenbach also writes about one American company's fate to sort of show how the whole thing really is. A company under Captain Pete Montfort attacks towards a northern knob of the ridge. Despite the enemy's automatic weapons and artillery, and despite taking heavy casualties, they manage to take their objective as the sun goes down. The problem is that now they don't have that much ammo left, and in the dark under enemy fire, they can't get any brought up. Montfort radios that he's going to stay put. He is not giving up the position. The division orders a wall of steel put around their position, and Divarti, the divisional artillery, complies, firing all night long to erect such a wall. Despite this, the company is overrun and completely wiped out to the last man. Later, when a new company fought its way up to the position, they found the Americans sprawled stiffly along the crest. Pete Montfort lay across a machine gun that had run dry. There was not a round of ammunition remaining.